Her billionaire CEO husband had twins with her sister. She divorced him. Then his mother went pale. She didn't tell you. A powerful story for my incredible and powerful family. I am Mr. Peter, your writer and storyteller, and I'm back with another unforgettable story filled with love, betrayal, heartbreak, and justice. Before we begin, please like this video, leave a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe if you haven't already. Right now, this is the only official and active Mr. Peter Stories World channel. Any other channels uploading my old videos are scammers stealing and reposting my content. If you come across them, please report them to help protect this community and support original storytelling. And let me ask you one question. If you enjoy these powerful stories, why haven't you liked this video and subscribed yet? Your support means everything and helps me continue bringing you new original stories. Now, my powerful family, let's begin today's incredible story. The cake needed candles, and the candles needed a lighter, and that was the whole reason Avril Stokes opened the drawer. Her mother's kitchen in Oak Cliff had not changed in 30 years. Same yellow curtains gone soft at the hems, same skillet hanging from the same nail, same junk drawer to the left of the stove, where a lighter had lived since before Avril was old enough to be trusted with one. She pulled it open without looking, the way you reach for things in a house your hands memorized before your mind did. The lighter wasn't there. What was there was a manila folder, unlabeled, sitting on top of the coupon scissors and the rubber bands and the church programs her mother never threw away. It was open half an inch, the way folders sit when someone has been into them recently. Through the gap, Avril saw the pale green border of a certificate and the words, State of Texas. Later, she would try to remember whether she had felt anything before she touched it, a warning, a coldness, some animal knowledge. She hadn't. She was 39 years old, standing in her mother's kitchen at her nephew's first birthday party, and she opened that folder for no reason, except that it was open already, and she was raised in this house, and nothing in it had ever been hidden from her. 2 birth certificates, twin boys, born last June at Methodist Dallas Medical Center. She knew their names. She had picked out their coming-home outfits herself, little cotton things with elephants stitched on the feet, because Tamsin had been too tired at the end of the pregnancy to shop, and their mother had said, Avril, you're the organized one. Handle it. Mother, Tamsin Renee Stokes. Father, Whitfield Rhodes Crane. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere behind her in the backyard, a child shrieked with laughter, and a man's voice said gently, Easy now, easy. And the voice was her husband's. Avril read the line again. She read it the way she had once read numbers that didn't reconcile, back when she had a practice of her own, and a brass nameplate, and clients who paid her to find the thing everyone swore wasn't there. Slowly, without blinking, waiting for the error to reveal itself as a typo, a transposition, an innocent slip of somebody's keyboard, there was no error. Texas does not print a father's name on a birth certificate for an unmarried mother unless that man signs an acknowledgement of paternity. She knew this the way accountants know things, incidentally, from years of other people's messes. Somebody at that hospital had put a form in front of Whitfield Crane, and Whitfield Crane had read it and dated it and signed it in the careful, closed-loop signature she had watched him put on 11 years of anniversary cards. 3 days after the twins were born. She checked the date twice. 3 days. She had been in that hospital 3 days after the twins were born. She had brought her sister a bag of tangerines and a phone charger. The back door opened. The party noise swelled and dimmed. Mama says the candles are in the... Tamsin stopped in the doorway. Avril did not turn around. She closed the folder evenly, the way you close a client file at the end of a long day, and slid the drawer shut with her hip. When she did turn, her sister was watching her with an expression Avril had known since childhood. the wide-eyed, breath-held stillness of a girl standing next to a broken lamp. Tamsin had never once in her life worn guilt well. It sat on her like borrowed clothes. "Found them," Avril said, and held up the lighter, which had been sitting in plain view on the windowsill the entire time. Her voice came out level. She would think about that later too, how level it came out, as if some deeper part of her had been rehearsing for years. "Avril, the cake's melting. It's 94 degrees out there." She walked past her sister and into the yard, into the heat and the balloons and the folding tables draped in dollar store cloths, carrying a sheet cake with 2 fat blue number 1s planted in the frosting. The party turned toward her like a flower, her mother's church friends, 2 cousins from DeSoto, a neighbor woman fanning herself with a paper plate, and by the fence, in the shade of the crepe myrtle her father had planted the year before he died, stood Whit, tall and easy in his weekend linen, holding one of the twins against his shoulder. Holding him the way you hold your own. She saw it now. That was the unbearable part, she would think that night, and for many nights after. Not that it had been hidden, but that it had been visible the entire time, laid out in the open like the folder in the drawer, and she had walked past it smiling. The way the boy settled into Whit's neck, the way Whit's hand covered the small back, fingers spread, a hand that knew its business. 11 months of Sunday dinners, 11 months of watching her husband hold her sister's children and thinking, look how good he is with them, and feeling, God forgive her, grateful. "There she is," Whit said, smiling at her over the child's head. "We were about to send a search party." "Couldn't find the lighter," Avril said. She set the cake down. She pressed each candle into the frosting, one and one. Her hands were doing an extraordinary thing, which was nothing at all. No tremor. Around her, the yard began arranging itself for the song, phones coming up, chairs scraping, her mother's voice calling everybody in, "Come on now, come on." Avril lit both candles and stepped back and sang. She sang the whole song. She heard her own voice inside the others, in tune, unremarkable, and she watched Whit lean down with the baby so the boy could see the flames, and she watched her sister lift the other twin onto her hip, and she watched her mother clasp her hands beneath her chin like a woman receiving a blessing, and the whole time one clean, cold sentence kept printing itself across the back of her mind, over and over, in the plain type of an official document. Father, Whitfield Rhodes Crane. The candles went out to applause. Somebody's phone flash went off. The twins were kissed and passed and kissed again. Avril cut the cake. Of course she cut the cake. She was the organized one. She laid slices onto paper plates and handed them out with forks and napkins, corner pieces for the cousins who liked frosting, a middle piece for the neighbor, and she was setting the knife down when she felt her mother beside her, close, smelling of powder and the kitchen. Avril looked up. Loistine Stokes was not looking at her daughter. She was looking through the open back door, down the hallway, into the kitchen, at the counter, at the stove, at the drawer beside the stove. Then her eyes came back to Avril and settled there, and they were perfectly calm and perfectly knowing. That was the thing Avril's body understood before her mind would let it in, that there was no fear anywhere in her mother's face. A woman surprised keeps a beat of stillness in her. A woman caught shows you one flash of the animal before the curtain comes down. Loistine showed her nothing. Her mother had the settled, unhurried eyes of someone checking on a pot she already knew was simmering, of a woman confirming that a thing long expected had finally, tidily arrived. 64 years old, in her good party dress, with frosting on her thumb, Loistine picked up a plate and put a slice of cake on it and held it out to her eldest child. "Corner piece," she said. "You always liked the roses." Avril looked at the cake. Blue sugar roses, crushed a little where the knife had passed. "I'm not hungry, Mama." "Suit yourself." Loistine set the plate down without any hurry at all, and smoothed the tablecloth with one hand, and then said in the mild, pleasant, front porch voice she used on solicitors and deacons, "You always did go looking through things that don't concern you." Then she walked back to her guests, calling out to the neighbor woman about the heat, laughing at something a cousin said, queen of her small yard, while Avril stood at the cake table with a knife in her hand and understood that her mother had just told her everything and admitted nothing in 14 words in front of 40 people in the house where Avril had learned to walk. The party ran 2 more hours. Avril stayed for all of it. She collected paper plates, she refilled the tea. She said goodbye to the cousins and complimented the neighbor's dress and let her sister hug her at the gate, briefly, neither of them speaking, Tamsin's heart going hard enough that Avril felt it against her own collarbone. In the car, Whit drove with one hand and hummed with the radio, and North Dallas slid past the windows, and the towers of downtown stood up out of the haze like a settlement on some richer planet. At a red light on Zhang Boulevard, he glanced over at her. "You're quiet." "Just tired," Avril said. The light changed. He drove on, satisfied, and Avril sat very still in the passenger seat of her husband's car because she had heard it. The sound of her own voice saying those 2 words, the exact pitch of them, the exact softness. It was her mother's voice. It was the voice her mother used when she was hiding something. She had been raised by it. She had just used it without thinking, smooth as reaching into a drawer, and it had worked. Avril watched the road come at her through the windshield and began very quietly to count what else she might have inherited without knowing. Chapter 2. The Negotiator. She gave herself 6 days, not to decide whether it was true. The state of Texas had already decided that, in pale green ink with a raised seal. The 6 days were for something else, something she couldn't have named at first, and by Thursday she understood what it was. She was watching him. She was conducting, in the house where she lived, a quiet audit of her own marriage, and like every audit she had ever run, it kept turning up the same finding. The fraud was not hidden in the numbers. The fraud was the numbers. Whit came home Monday at 7 and kissed her temple and asked what smelled so good. Tuesday, he took a call in his study with the door shut, and through the wood she heard the low, unhurried furniture of his voice, and she stood in the hallway with a laundry basket on her hip, realizing she'd been hearing that shut door for 2 years and calling it work. Wednesday, he brought her flowers from the good grocery store, ranunculus her favorite, and she put them in water and thought, he has never once brought home the wrong flower, and understood for the first time that flawlessness was its own kind of confession. Nobody is that careful by accident. Care like that is maintenance. Care like that is a man servicing a machine he needs to keep running quietly. On Saturday morning, she put the folder on the kitchen island. She had gone back for the certificates on Wednesday while her mother was at Bible study, using her own key, walking through her childhood home like a stranger executing a warrant. The folder had still been in the drawer. That detail had told her something too. Her mother had not moved it. Her mother had not needed to. Whit came downstairs at 8 in his running clothes, earbuds in one hand, and saw the folder, and saw her sitting behind it with her coffee, and Avril watched the next 4 seconds very closely, because she had spent 11 years believing she knew this man's face. He did not go pale. He did not freeze. He looked at the folder, and then at her, and then he set the earbuds down on the counter, gently, the way you set down something you are finished with, and pulled out the stool across from her and sat. "Okay," he said. "Okay," she repeated. "Okay. 11 years, and I get okay." Would you rather I perform something? You've clearly known for days. You've been watching me all week like a line item. He said it without cruelty, almost with approval, one professional noting another's diligence. So, let's not waste the performance on each other. Ask me what you want to ask me. Are they yours? Yes. The word came out so easily that it made the kitchen tilt. She had prepared for denial. She had rehearsed against every architecture of denial, mapped his exits, readied the date on the signature line like a knife behind her back. She had not prepared for a man laying his own crime on the table like a business card. How long, she said. Avril. How long? Long enough that the answer only hurts you and helps nothing. He folded his hands. She looked at them, the clean nails, the wedding band, the hands she had held in a church on Marsalis Avenue in front of God and 200 people. I'm not going to itemize it for you. That's not me protecting myself. There's nothing left to protect. It's me telling you the only true thing that matters this morning, which is that this doesn't have to destroy you. Destroy me. Financially, socially, any of it. He leaned back. Here's what I want you to hear, and I want you to hear it before the anger settles in and starts making your decisions for you. You have been an exceptional wife. That's not flattery. I don't flatter. You ran my books for 4 years better than the firm I pay $400,000 a year now. You built half the discipline this company runs on. I know exactly what you contributed, and I intend for you to walk away from this in a way that honors it. Avril sat very still. Somewhere in the last minute, the conversation had changed rooms without her. She had walked in holding a betrayal, and he had somehow received it as an agenda item, and was now unmistakably in the smooth, forward-leaning cadence she had heard through the study door, opening a negotiation. "You're offering me terms," she said slowly. "I found out on Sunday that my husband fathered my sister's children, and it is 8 o'clock Saturday morning, and you are offering me terms. I'm offering you a soft landing instead of a public war. Yes. Most men would be on their knees. Most men would lie to you for another 5 years and let you find out in a deposition." Something crossed his face then, the nearest thing to feeling she'd seen all week, and it startled her that it looked like fatigue. "I have watched marriages end in courtrooms, Avril. I have watched people set fire to 4 years of their own lives to make the other person spend 3. I'm not going to pretend to a shame. I'd only be performing, and I'm not going to let us become that. What I did is done. What happens to the rest of your life is being decided right now at this island, and I am trying, in the only language I have, to be generous." Generous. She turned the word over like a counterfeit coin. "Say the number then. Since we're at the table, what does 11 years buy? The house, free and clear. A settlement in cash, mid-6 figures, structured however your accountant's heart desires. Your car, your accounts. No fight over anything you can see from where you're sitting." He paused, and in the pause, she heard it coming, the way you hear a train before the rails start to sing. "I ask one thing. There it is. Quiet. Not forever. Not a muzzle. Just discretion. Until the end of the year. There is a business matter concluding this year, and it requires calm water. After that, tell your story to anyone you like. Write a book. I'll blurb it." A ghost of the charm, offered and withdrawn. "But until this matter concludes, no lawyers grandstanding, no scenes, no social media, nothing that makes noise. In exchange, I make this the gentlest divorce in the history of Dallas County. You have my word." "Your word," Avril said. "My word on business," he said evenly, "has never once been broken. You know that better than anyone alive. You kept the ledgers. And the terrible thing, the thing she would lie awake with, was that it was true. She sat in her kitchen across from a man who had betrayed her in the oldest and dirtiest way a man can betray a wife. and she could not name one invoice, one vendor, $1 in 4 years of his books that had ever been where it shouldn't. His fidelity had simply never been to her. It had been to the company, whole and undivided, every scrap of it, and she had spent 11 years proudly balancing the accounts of her own irrelevance. "What's the business matter?" she said. "That's not your concern." 11 years, Wit. And the answer is the same at 11 years as it would be at 40. Not unkind, immovable. A door closing somewhere far inside the machine of him. "You'll have a proposal from my attorney within 2 weeks. Take it to any lawyer you want, though I'd suggest someone with sense over someone with theatre. Trammell, maybe. Your mother knows him. He does clean work." He stood, collected his earbuds, and paused at the end of the island. And for a moment he looked at her, the way he'd looked at her across a folding table at a small business expo 12 years ago, when she was the sharp-eyed CPA with her own practice, and he was nobody yet, a man with one warehouse and a plan. "For what it's worth," he said, "I never lied to you about anything except this." "Except this," she said. "Except my sister, except 2 children." He nodded slightly, conceding the arithmetic, and turned to go, and Avril heard herself speak before she knew she had decided to. "Why her?" Wit stopped in the doorway with his back to her, and the pause went on long enough that she thought he might finally do her the small mercy of not answering. Outside, a neighbour's sprinkler ticked around its slow circle. The refrigerator hummed the same note as her mother's. "You're going to spend a long time," he said, "telling yourself this was an affair, an accident of weakness. Wine, proximity, a weekend I was weak and your sister was willing." He looked back at her then, and his face held nothing she could use, no guilt and no plea, only that level, appraising calm she had once mistaken for depth. "Don't waste the years, Avril. The twins were not an accident." The front door opened and closed with its soft, expensive click, and his footsteps went down the drive, easy and unhurried. A man out for his Saturday run, and Avril sat alone at the island, where she had eaten 4,000 breakfasts, in the house he had just handed her like severance, hearing the sentence land somewhere below thought, down where the counting never stops. Not an accident meant planned. Planned meant a plan. And a plan, as she knew better than anyone alive, always leaves a paper trail. Chapter 3. Her Own Blood. Tamsin lived in a rented duplex off Illinois Avenue, with a dead plant on the porch and a doormat that said, "Blessed." Avril sat in her car across the street for 11 minutes before she went in, not gathering courage, gathering the opposite, packing courage away, because courage was loud and she needed to be quiet. Wit's warning kept playing in her head. The anger settles in and starts making your decisions for you, and she hated that he was right about anything, and he was right about that. She had seen it 100 times in her working life. People burned down their own claims. They screamed at the auditor and shredded the wrong box and turned a clean case into a mess a jury couldn't follow. The angry ones always lost. So she would not be angry. She would be the other thing, the thing that files everything. Tamsin opened the door with a twin on her hip and flinched, actually flinched, and then covered it with a smile so fast that Avril thought, "You've been practicing that." Behind her the duplex was loud with morning, cartoons, a bottle warmer, the second boy hollering from a playpen, and the smell of formula and coffee and baby everywhere, dense as weather. Av. Nobody had called her that since high school. "You should have texted, the places. Wit told me everything." The smile held for one more second out of pure muscle memory, and then it came down, and what was under it was not what Avril had braced for. Not shame, not the broken lamp face from the kitchen. What was under it was something almost like relief, the look of a woman who has been carrying a heavy box for a very long time and has finally been allowed to set it down in front of the person it was addressed to. "Okay," Tamsin said. Her sister and her husband, Avril thought. Even their surrender sounded the same. Come in then. Don't wake the other one. The living room was small and clean and trying. Avril recognized the couch from a discount showroom on Camp Wisdom Road, recognized the elephant blanket folded over its arm because she had bought it herself, and had to stand for a moment mastering the fact that her gifts had lived here the whole time, domesticated, folded into this other life like sleeper agents. She did not sit. Tamsin settled the twin into the playpen with his brother and stayed on her feet too, arms crossed, the width of a rug between them. Two Stokes women squared off the way they'd squared off over borrowed sweaters and broken Walkmans and every smaller theft that had led, it turned out, here. Say what you came to say, Tamsin said. I came to hear you say it. Why? You got the certificates. You got Whit's confession. What do you need me for? The details. Her chin came up. You want dates, Avril. You want hotels. I want to know how my sister looks at me across Thanksgiving dinner for years, Avril said, quiet and even. Hands me her babies to hold, lets me plan her shower, lets me pick out the clothes they came home in, and sleeps at night. Who says I slept? You look rested. It landed. Tamsin's arms tightened across her chest, and for a moment she looked 16 again, cornered by a report card. Then something in her set, hardened, and when she spoke, her voice had a note in it Avril had never heard, or had heard all her life and never listened to. You know what your problem is? You think this is about you. Everything, always, the whole world roots through Avril. She laughed, short and awful. You want a villain with a cigarette telling you how she plotted. There's no plot, Av. There's just a man, and he wanted things, and I was the one who said yes. To your sister's husband. To a life. It came out louder than the room, and one of the twins startled and began to grumble, and Tamsin lowered her voice with an effort that shook. You don't know. You have never once known, because you've never stood where I stand. You were the one Mama bragged about. 30 years, Avril. The grades, the scholarship, the CPA, the wedding at the good church, the house in Preston Hollow. Every Sunday of my life, I sat in that pew and listened to my own mother do your press releases. You think I don't love you? I love you. I also spent my whole life being the spare, and nobody asks the spare if she's tired. The room hummed. The cartoon sang its bright idiot song, and Avril, to her own disgust, felt it move in her, a soft, traitorous ache, because she knew that pew and she knew that voice doing those press releases, and she knew, in some sealed drawer of her own, that it had never once occurred to her to wonder what her victories sounded like from one seat over. For 3 full seconds, she almost crossed the rug. Then Tamsin lifted her hand to push her hair back, an ordinary gesture, and the morning light from the window caught her fingers, and Avril saw the ring, yellow gold, old, slightly worn at the band, a small oval garnet in a crown setting, one prong repaired long ago by a jeweler on Jefferson Boulevard, and Avril knew about the prong because she had been in the room when it broke. It was their grandmother's ring. Odell Stokes had worn it through 40 years of cleaning other people's houses, and had said on a porch in the last summer of her life, with both girls sitting at her feet, that it would go to the eldest. Everyone had heard it. It was family law, settled law. The ring goes to Avril. The ache in her chest closed like a fist. When did Mama give you that? Avril said. Tamsin followed her gaze, and her hand dropped, too late, and the guilt that hadn't shown for the affair, for the twins, for 11 months of certificates in a drawer, arrived now of all times for a piece of jewelry. She turned the stone inward with her thumb, an old habit of concealment, so smooth and practiced that it answered the question before she did. A while ago. How long is a while? Before the twins, Avril said. It was before the twins. She could hear her own voice doing the thing it did in depositions, going flatter as it got closer. That ring was the first payment, wasn't it? That's how it works in this family. Mama doesn't say yes with words. She hands you something that used to be promised to somebody else. You should go, Tamsin said. She knew, Tamsin. Before there was anything to know, she knew. Look at me and tell me different. Tamsin looked at her, and it was there in her sister's face, plain as the state seal on those certificates, the whole answer, and along with it, something worse, a kind of pity, the same pity Avril had seen and refused to name at the birthday party, the look people give you when you are the last to understand. You should go ask Mama, Tamsin said softly. The questions you're asking me. Loistine was in her backyard when Avril got there, taking sun-stiff towels off the line, and she didn't stop working when the gate creaked, didn't turn, just said, I wondered which day you'd come. Mama, look at me. I'm listening fine. A towel came down, was folded on the crease, laid in the basket. You've been to Tamsin's. She called me before you were off the porch crying about that ring, 33 years old, and still can't hold water. Fold. Basket. Go on and say it all. Get it out. You knew. I know a lot of things. You knew your daughter was sleeping with my husband. You knew those babies were his. You kept the certificates in the kitchen drawer like receipts, and you let me plan that shower. Avril heard her voice climb and hauled it back down. The night I called you crying because Tamsin's contractions started early, you were on the phone with me for an hour, Mama. An hour, praying with me. And every word of that prayer was meant. For who? Loistine took the last towel down and set the basket on her hip and finally turned, and her face was the face from the cake table, mild and settled and dry as August, and when she spoke, it was in the voice of a woman explaining patiently why the electric bill gets paid before the cable. You listen to me, because I'm only going to preach this once. You have had 11 good years and a house in Preston Hollow. You had the wedding, the cars, the trips, the name, 11 years of soft Avril up out of this neighborhood, and you never once looked back down to ask how the rest of us were living down here. Some of us started with nothing and stayed there. She shifted the basket. Your sister took a chance at a life. I'm not going to stand in my own yard and apologize for my child wanting what you had. He is my husband. He was an opportunity, Loistine said, and you'd already had your turn. The clothesline swayed empty between its poles. Somewhere down the block a dog was barking at nothing, and Avril stood in the yard she'd grown up in and understood that she had been auditing the wrong household. She had spent 6 days studying her husband for the moment the mask moved. Her mother had never worn one. Sign whatever the man gives you, Loistine said, going up the back steps, and be grateful, and close the gate on your way out. It swells in the heat. Chapter 4. Clean Work. The law office of Hollis Trammell occupied a converted house on Keys Boulevard, and everything in it was designed to say, old friend. No glass tower, no marble. A receptionist named Miss Dot, who had a candy dish and knew everybody's mother. Diplomas on wood paneling, a photograph of Trammell shaking hands with a county commissioner 2 administrations gone, and Trammell himself, 58 and silver at the temples, coming around the desk with both hands out like a man greeting family at a funeral. Avril Stokes, Lord, the last time I saw you, you were graduating salutatorian and your mama cried through the whole program. He took her hand in both of his. I am so sorry it's this that brings you in. Sit down, sit down. Bring this child some coffee. This child was 39 and had brought a folder of her own. She sat. Her mother had made the referral before Avril had asked anyone for anything, which should have registered and did register and got filed with everything else that registered lately, in a stack that grew nightly and refused to mean anything yet. Hollis handled your uncle's estate. Hollis does clean work. Hollis won't let it turn ugly. Even Wit had said the name. that Saturday at the island, and at the time she had been too full of wreckage to hear the strangeness of it, her husband and her mother pointing her toward the same door. Trammell listened to her whole account with his fingers steepled and his eyes closed, nodding at intervals like a man listening to a familiar hymn. When she finished, he sat forward and delivered his verdict in a voice like warm gravy. "Here is the good news, and there is good news. He's not fighting you. I made a call this morning, professional courtesy, and their side wants exactly what you want, which is a clean, quiet, dignified resolution. In 30 years of family law, I can tell you that is rare as hen's teeth. Man's giving you the house, Averill. The house, a settlement, no games." He spread his hands. "We could have this done a week after the waiting period runs." 60 days, Averill said. "You've been reading." He smiled. 60 days from filing, that's Texas. Fastest divorce the state allows. And I see no reason on earth we can't hit it. What about the company? The pause was small. A quarter beat, no more. The kind of pause you'd only catch if you had spent 20 years listening for the moment a client's voice changed in the middle of an explanation. What about it? Crane Provision was incorporated in 2016. She kept her voice mild, a student asking. "We married in 2015. I kept those books myself for 4 years. Texas is a community property state. I'd like to understand what my interest looks like before I sign anything." Trammell nodded slowly, respectfully, the nod of a man about to correct someone he was fond of. "And that is exactly the right question, and it's why I'm glad you're sitting with me and not some billboard lawyer who'd take that question and set your life on fire with it." He came around and half sat on the front edge of his desk, close, confiding. "Yes, community property, but the business is characterized as his separate enterprise, built on his separate capital, his founder's interest, and their side has an inventory sworn and ready that reflects that. Now, could we challenge the characterization? We could. We could demand a forensic valuation, subpoena 5 years of records, tie this thing up past Christmas, spend $80,000–90,000 of the very settlement he's offering you, and for what? A privately held food distributor, warehouses and truck leases, sugar, debt." He shook his head, sorrowful. "Averill, I have watched women chase a husband's business through the courts like it was buried treasure and come out 2 years later with less than they were offered on day one. Do not let anger write checks that arithmetic has to cash." It was a good speech. She recognized it as a good speech even while it was working on her, the way you can admire the construction of a thing that is being done to you. And it was seamed through with just enough truth. That was the craft of it. Litigation was expensive. Anger did write bad checks. She had said nearly the same words to her own clients. "I'd still like to see their sworn inventory," she said. "You'll have it the day it's filed. And the settlement offer in writing. Week, 10 days. He patted the desk twice, a gavel of good feeling. Meeting adjourned. "You let me carry this, you hear? You've been carrying enough." She was in the parking lot before she identified what was bothering her, and it wasn't the speech, and it wasn't the pause. It was the phone call. "I made a call this morning, professional courtesy." She had signed his engagement letter 20 minutes ago, in his office, with his pen. He had called Witt's lawyer before she was his client. The days that followed had a greased quality, everything sliding, nothing catching. The petition was filed at the George Allen Courts building downtown, cause number stamped, in the matter of the marriage of Crane and Stokes, her whole vandalized life reduced to a caption. Witt moved into a furnished place uptown with a doorman and, according to a cousin who had no business knowing, a gym on the 9th floor. Papers began arriving in thick envelopes, and Averill read every page of every one at the kitchen island, with a legal pad, the way she used to read general ledgers, and Trammell teased her for it, gently, on the phone. "Most clients skim," he said. "Most clients sign where the tabs are. The sworn inventory came on a Thursday. She read it 4 times. It was clean. That was the thing. It was beautifully, professionally clean. Every account she knew about listed to the dollar, the house at fair value, the cars. his 401k down to the last statement, a document wearing its own thoroughness like a press suit. And there, in the schedule of separate property, one line, no more. WRC Holdings, LLC, 100% membership interest, separate property of petitioner, value, see attached CPA letter. The attached CPA letter was from a firm she'd never heard of, ran a page and a half, and valued her husband's company using the word conservative 3 times. She sat with it a long time. 11 years ago, she would have taken that letter apart in an afternoon. She knew that. Somewhere in her hands the skill still lived, the old cold joy of pulling one thread until a whole confident document unraveled on the table. But 11 years ago she had also slept nights, and had a practice, and a husband who was only a fiancé, and a sister who was only a sister. And this week she had cried in the shower twice and once without warning, in the cereal aisle at the Tom Thumb on Inwood. And Trammell's voice was always there. Warm gravy. Do not let anger write checks. Maybe clean was just clean. Maybe a tired woman staring at a document at midnight, hunting for ghosts in the footnotes, was exactly the cautionary tale he kept describing. She signed nothing yet, but she put the inventory in the folder and the folder in the drawer of her own kitchen, and she noted, with a small dry horror, that she was becoming a woman who kept folders in kitchen drawers. The following Tuesday, she went to collect the last of her things from Witt's office. Crane Provisions headquarters sat off Stemmons Freeway, a low smoked glass building in front of the original warehouse, and walking in was like visiting a country she'd helped found and been exiled from. The receptionist was new and didn't know her. The conference room where Avril had once spent a January closing the year-end books had new chairs. A box was waiting for her at the front desk, packed by someone else's hands, her framed photo of her father on top, glass down. She was carrying it out through the corridor when she passed the big conference room and heard, through the cracked door, a fragment of a voice she didn't know, young, male, brisk. So the data room needs to be locked down by Wednesday, because the Chicago people land Thursday, and Witt wants... A second voice shushed the first, low and fast, and the door clicked shut from inside. Avril kept walking. Her heels kept their rhythm on the polished concrete. Her face stayed pleasant for the new receptionist. The box stayed level in her arms. She had learned this month that her body could be trusted to carry on without her, but in the car, in the visitor lot, under the sign that still said, "Reserved, A. Crane," because facilities hadn't gotten around to it, she sat with her hands on the wheel and let the words line up in front of her. Data room. She knew what a data room was. Nobody builds a data room to sell trucks of sugar. A business matter concluding this year, requiring calm water. The Chicago people land Thursday, and a settlement, arriving any day now, that Hollis Trammell was very anxious for her to sign before Christmas. Before, she thought, watching a delivery truck ease out of the yard her husband owned, before whatever the Chicago people were coming to buy got a price tag on it. She looked up at the smoked glass building. Somewhere inside it, in rooms she used to have keys to, numbers were being assembled. And numbers, Avril thought, starting the car, were the one member of this family that had never once lied to her. Chapter 5. The Chorus. The first casserole arrived on a Sunday, which was how Avril knew the campaign had begun. In her family, food was never only food. Food was a summons. A foil-covered dish on your porch meant somebody had decided your business was congregation business, and by the second week of September, there was a rotation running, aunties and church mothers and second cousins arriving at the Preston Hollow house in twos, settling into her living room like a jury, patting her knee, telling her she looked thin. None of them said the word twins. That was the genius of it. The scandal itself had been quietly ruled inadmissible, and what remained, apparently, was only the question of Avril's behavior going forward. "What you don't want," said Aunt Verdine, who had driven up from DeSoto with a pound cake and an agenda, "is a mess. You hear me? A woman can survive anything but a mess." "He's giving her the house," said cousin Paleℹ to the room, as if Avril were upstairs. You know how many women walk away from these things with nothing. Sign the papers, sweetheart. Sign them and hold your head up. Think of those babies, said Mother Hazeltine from the church, 79 years old, reaching over to squeeze Avril's wrist with a hand like warm paper. Whatever the grown folks did, those boys are family. Don't you let lawyers make orphans of family. And don't be putting anything on the internet, Verdine added. Renetta's girl put her divorce on the internet and now she can't get a job at a bank. It went on like that, Sunday after Sunday, a soft, loving, relentless pressure, and the terrible efficiency of it was that not one of these women was lying. They believed every word. They had survived their own husbands and their own scandals with exactly this doctrine: quiet, sign, endure, and they had come to administer it to her like medicine, holding her hand while they did. You could not even fight it. Fighting it made you the mess. Her mother never came with the casseroles. Loistine ran the operation the way she ran everything, from her own kitchen, by telephone, present in every room she wasn't in. Avril could hear her in the auntie's phrasing, 11 good years, hold your head up, whole sentences arriving second-hand with her mother's fingerprints still on them. Charlene Boggs came on a Thursday, unannounced, with a bottle of wine and no foil dish, and that alone was a mercy. They had known each other since Carter High School, since band, and Charlene had spent 20 years managing a dental office in Duncanville, which she said was the perfect training for understanding human nature, because nobody shows you who they really are, like a grown man afraid of a cleaning. She sat on Avril's patio, kicked off her shoes, poured 2 glasses, and listened to the whole thing, all of it, the drawer, the island, the ring, the clothesline, the inventory, the casserole rotation, without one interruption, which was Charlene's particular genius. Then she was quiet for a while, looking out at the pool that Avril had stopped bothering to have cleaned. Can I say the thing, she said, that I've been sitting on for 3 weeks? Since when, do you ask? Since your whole life caught fire, I've been trying to have manners. She turned in her chair. Avril, why is everyone in such a hurry for you to sign? Avril looked at her. I'm serious. Walk it with me. The man's lawyer had an offer sketched before you filed. Your lawyer, who your mama picked, is talking about beating the 60-day clock like it's a track meet. The aunties are running shifts. Your mother has half the congregation praying specifically for a quiet resolution, which I didn't know was something you could put on a prayer list. She ticked them off on her fingers. You are the injured party. You. In the whole history of divorce, when has everybody ever been rushing the injured party? People rush paperwork for one reason, girl, because something in it doesn't survive daylight. The pool filter ticked. Somewhere over toward the tollway, evening traffic made its ocean sound. Trammell says a fight would eat the settlement, Avril said, and heard, even as she said it, that she was quoting. Trammell. Charlene took a long sip. Hollis Trammell. Isn't that your mama's people's lawyer? Handled your uncle's mess back when? She shook her head slowly. I manage a dental office, so what do I know? But if my husband ran off with my sister, I don't believe I'd let my mama cater the divorce. The note from Eugenia Crane arrived the next morning. Avril almost didn't recognize the name on the envelope because in 11 years her mother-in-law had sent her perhaps 4 pieces of mail, all of them Christmas cards signed by a service. This was different. Heavy cream paper, real ink, a hand that had been taught penmanship in another century, and the whole message ran 6 lines. Avril, I am told things are concluding quietly. Everyone seems very pleased about that. In my experience, quiet has a price, and the person who pays it is rarely consulted about the purchase. I signed my quiet a long time ago. I will not presume to advise you. E.C. Avril read it standing at the mailbox, then twice more at the kitchen island. It was not a kindness, exactly. It was not an apology, and it took no side. It was more like a message in a bottle from some other shipwreck, floated across 40 years of Preston Hollow dinner parties, from a woman Avril had only ever known as a straightback and a strand of pearls at the far end of Whit's table. I signed my quiet a long time ago. She thought of every holiday she had sat near Eugenia Crane and received nothing but weather and compliments on the roast. She had assumed there was nothing behind the pearls but more pearls. She put the note in the folder in the drawer. The folder was getting thick. She noticed that too, the way she noticed everything now, from a slight remove, as if some second Averill were keeping the file on the first one. Certificates, inventory, a stranger's warning on cream paper. A case was assembling itself in her kitchen, and she had not yet admitted she was building one. It was Paleℹ, of all people, who delivered the last blow of the month, and she did it by accident, on the phone, in the middle of a report about somebody's retirement party. "And you know Tamsin's over there on Winslow Court now, so she came through the party for a minute looking like money. I'll say that for her." "Winslow Court," Averill said. "Over there by the good elementary, the brick one with the arch." Paleℹ caught herself half a beat too late, the way people do when they remember mid-sentence which cousin they're talking to. "Well, anyway. Paleℹ, my sister manages a nail salon on Westmoreland. Who's paying for a house on Winslow Court?" "I don't get in people's pockets," said Paleℹ, who had never once in her life been outside of people's pockets, and changed the subject with the agility of long practice. Averill drove past it that evening. She told herself she wouldn't, and then she was doing it, rolling slow down Winslow Court in the last of the light. And there it was, the brick one, with the arch, 15 minutes from her own front door. New sod still showing its seams. A magnolia balled in burlap by the porch, waiting to be planted. Tamsin's old Kia sat in the driveway looking embarrassed, like a guest who'd worn jeans to a wedding. She didn't stop. She drove to the end of the street, turned around in a cul-de-sac, and passed it once more. And on the second pass, she saw the sign lying flat in the flower bed, the realtor's sign, waiting for trash day, sold banner still stapled across it. At home, she opened her laptop and did what any citizen could do, what she had done 1,000 times in another life. Dallas Central Appraisal District, public record, free to anyone with the address. The house on Winslow Court had changed hands in July. The recorded deed showed no lender, no deed of trust, no mortgage, nothing. Somebody had paid $380,000 for that house in cash, and the buyer was not Tamsin Renee Stokes. The buyer was an entity, WC Residential 2, LLC, with a registered agent's address in a building downtown. One of those addresses that is nothing but a wall of brass mailboxes, a name made of initials that could belong to anyone. Averill sat looking at the screen for a long time. WC. She was too honest with numbers, even now, to call it proof. Initials were not proof. Initials were smoke. But she had spent 4 years keeping the books of a man who never in his life paid retail, never bought what he could structure, never put his own name where a company's would do, and she knew his handwriting when she saw it, even written in shell companies. Her sister was living 15 minutes away, in a cash house, held by initials planted with a magnolia, and the whole choir of her family was singing the same 2 notes in rotation on her porch every Sunday. Sign. Be grateful. Sign. Be grateful. Averill closed the laptop and sat in her quiet kitchen in the house she'd been given like severance, and said out loud to no one, in a voice that surprised her with its calm, "What did quiet cost, Eugenia?" Chapter 6. The Signature. The mediation was held on the 14th floor of a tower on Ross Avenue, in a conference room with a view of downtown that nobody looked at, on a Tuesday in October, 68 days after the filing. Averill wore grey. She had thought about that longer than she cared to admit, standing in her closet at 6 in the morning, understanding that everything she put on would be read by somebody as a statement, grief or defiance or money, and settling finally on the grey suit she used to wear to audit exits, the one that said nothing at all, except that its owner read footnotes. Trammell met her in the lobby, smelling of bay rum, carrying the good news like a bouquet. "They came up," he said in the elevator, delighted. "I leaned on them Friday and they came up. 400,000, the house free and clear. Your vehicle, your accounts, each side bears its own fees. Avril. He said her name like an amen. In 30 years, I have not seen a cleaner exit. You walk in a wronged woman, and you walk out a free one before Thanksgiving, with the deed in your purse. The elevator counted its floors. And the business, she said, characterized as separate, per the inventory, per the CPA letter, exactly as we discussed. A microscopic firmness entered the gravy. We are not reopening that today. Today we land the plane. Witt's side had the far end of the table. His attorney was a woman named Kessington, from a firm with 4 names, precise and pleasant, with a paralegal to her left, running 2 laptops. Witt sat beyond her in charcoal, and when Avril entered he rose, actually rose the old courtesy, and she was struck by how well he looked, rested, trimmed, a man in the final stages of a project that was coming in on schedule. The mediator shuttled between rooms for the first 2 hours, which was mercy because it meant she mostly didn't have to look at him. She sat with Trammell in a small caucus room with bad coffee and a bowl of mince, and the numbers came and went, and every time she asked a question with the word company in it, Trammell performed the same gentle pivot, patient as a man turning a car around in a narrow street. The valuation would cost more than it found. The letter was conservative but credible. The clock, the clock, the clock. And here was the truth she would have to live with afterward, the truth she would take out and examine on many future nights. By 2 o'clock that afternoon, she wanted to sign. Not because she was persuaded, because she was tired in a way she had never been tired in her life, tired in the bones of her face, tired of casseroles and cousins, tired of sleeping diagonally in a bed built for a marriage, tired of being the case everybody in 2 families was managing. Somewhere in the last 68 days, exhaustion had begun impersonating wisdom, whispering in Trammell's exact cadence that peace was a form of winning, that the cleanest revenge was a life, that $400,000 and a paid-off house was, for a girl from Oak Cliff, a fortune by any honest measure. She thought of her father, who had planted a crepe myrtle and died before it bloomed, who used to say, "Baby, don't fight every fight they sell you tickets to." At 3 o'clock, she initialed 11 pages and signed 4, and it was done, and the room did the small, strange ceremony that rooms do, chairs pushed back, folders squared, the mediator congratulating everyone on their reasonableness, as if reasonableness had been anyone's contribution but hers. That should have been the end of it. Later she would understand that it very nearly was, that the whole future turned on the next 90 seconds on Kessington's paralegal, who chose that moment to slide one more document down the polished table. "Last item," Kessington said, pleasant as a flight attendant. "A standard confidentiality agreement. Housekeeping, really." Trammell was already reaching for it, already nodding, and Avril, out of nothing but 11 years of habit, out of the muscle that had read every envelope at that kitchen island, put her hand flat on the paper before it reached him and turned it around and read it. The room let her. Rooms full of lawyers always let you read. It costs them nothing, because almost no one really does. It was 2 pages. The first was ordinary, mutual non-disparagement, the marriage, the settlement terms. Boilerplate she'd seen 100 versions of. It was the second page that stopped her, a definitions section, and inside the definitions, quietly, like a passenger who had boarded with the crowd, one clause: confidential information shall further include all non-public information concerning Crane Provision Company and WRC Holdings, LLC, including without limitation their finances, operations, ownership, valuation, and any actual or contemplated transactions, whether such information was acquired before, during, or after the marriage. Averil read it twice. Then she looked up, past Kessington, at her husband. Any contemplated transactions, whether acquired before, during, or after. They were not asking her to keep quiet about the divorce. The divorce was a fig leaf. They were papering over the company, gagging her on everything she knew from 4 years inside its books, and anything she might ever come to know, forever. And they had tucked it behind the settlement like a rider behind a horse, timed for the exact minute. Her hand was warm from signing, and her whole body was leaning toward the door. "This wasn't in the term sheet," she said. "It's standard," Kessington said smoothly. "It's standard for a merger," Averil said. "It's exotic for a marriage." The paralegal stopped typing. Trammell's hand landed on her forearm, warm, paternal, and she heard the gravy begin. "Averil, sweetheart, it's housekeeping, let's not at the finish line." And she did not look at him. She was looking at Whit, and Whit was looking back at her, and something was happening in his face at last. After 68 days of charcoal calm, something small and fast, a flicker at the hinge of his jaw, there and gone, like a light in a house you'd been told was empty. He needed this. The settlement, the house, the 400,000, all of that he had conceded like pocket change. This page was the purchase. She could feel it through the table, the sudden alignment of every person on that side of the room, the paralegal's stillness, Kessington's patience wound one notch tighter, and she thought, with a clarity that arrived like cold air, "You can sell a thing without knowing what it is. You can also refuse to." "No," Averil said. "Averil," Trammell began, "the settlement is signed. That part's done, and I'll honor every line of it." She squared the 2 pages of the confidentiality agreement evenly and slid them back down the table, and her voice, to her own ears, sounded like her grandmother's, like a woman declining a second helping at a table where she owed nobody an explanation. "This, I'm not signing. Not today, not revised, not with a bow on it. I spent 4 years keeping that company's books honest for free. I'm not spending the rest of my life keeping its secrets for free, too." "There could be consideration," Kessington said very quietly. "Meaningful consideration." And there it was. The offer inside the offer, arriving in under 5 seconds, which told her more about the paper's value than any valuation letter ever could. You do not bid on worthless things. "I'm sure there could," Averil said, and stood, and picked up her purse with the deed in it. Whit rose too, unhurried, buttoning his jacket, every inch the gracious counterparty, and walked her the length of the table, as if seeing a guest to the door of his own home. At the threshold, out of the lawyer's earshot, he spoke with his eyes on the hallway ahead, in the low, even, almost intimate register of a man commenting on the weather. "You're making a mistake." "You've made mine for 11 years, she said. "I wanted one of my own." "You don't even know what it says no to." "No," she agreed, "but you do. And I watched your face while I read it." She pressed the elevator button. "You taught me that, Whit, at our kitchen island. Don't waste the performance on people who are watching." The doors opened. She stepped in alone. And as they closed, the last thing she saw of her husband, framed and narrowing, was Whitfield Road's crane standing perfectly still in a hallway on the 14th floor, not returning to the room where his lawyers waited, but looking at her, recalculating, and she understood, with a satisfaction so sharp and so unfamiliar that it took her the whole ride down to name it, that for the first time in this entire ruinous year, a plan of his had just missed. 68 days he had spent pushing her gently toward a door. She had walked through it, exactly as designed, signed, settled, managed. but she had walked through it with her voice. In the parking garage, she sat in her car and did not cry, and did not exult, and instead did the thing that was becoming her ritual and her religion. She took out the legal pad, and she wrote down the date and the clause, word for word, from memory, all of it, before, during, or after, and under it, underlined twice. One question, the question that was going to reorganize the remainder of her life. What is on that page worth more to him than everything he just gave me? Chapter 7. The Vendor File. The divorce was final on the 3rd of November, granted in 4 minutes by a judge who mispronounced her name, and Averil Stokes walked out of the George Allen Courts building into a bright, cold morning, owning a paid-off house, $400,000, and no idea who she was. She gave herself exactly 1 week to fall apart, scheduled it like an engagement, and mostly kept to it. Then, the following Monday, she did the thing she had been circling for a month. She called Berryhill and Sasser, a mid-size accounting firm in Las Colinas, where an old classmate from her exam days was now a partner, and asked, in a voice she kept carefully casual, whether they ever used contract help in busy season. The classmate, a round, kind, relentless man named Othel Berryhill, laughed at her for a full 10 seconds. "Do we use contract help? Averil Stokes is asking me if we use contract help. Woman, I have been trying to hire you since 2013. Half my staff can't find a related party transaction with both hands. Can you start Wednesday?" She could start Wednesday. The work came back to her the way swimming comes back, all at once and in her whole body. The first morning, she sat down with a shoebox client, a family HVAC company with 3 years of chaos in a banker's box, and somewhere in the second hour, tracing a loan that had been booked as revenue by somebody's nephew, she realized she had gone 40 minutes without thinking about any crane, and put her pencil down and sat with that, the way you'd sit with the first painless breath after a long illness. Small dignities accumulated. Her own coffee maker, 1 cup, no carafe. Her name, her only name, on new checks. A Saturday morning at White Rock Lake, walking the East Shore with Charlene, anonymous among the rowers and the retirees, nobody's client, nobody's cautionary tale. She had her locks changed, not out of fear, but out of ceremony, and tipped the locksmith $20 for what was, though he didn't know it, a christening. The twins found her anyway, the second week of December in the Tom Thumb on Inwood. She heard them before she saw them, that unmistakable stereo fussing, and looked up from the oranges. And there they were at the end of the aisle, riding in a double cart pushed by a young woman Averil didn't recognize, a sitter or a nanny now, because apparently there was money for nannies. The boys were bigger. That was the ambush of it. In her mind they had stayed the size of the birthday party, and here they were with new faces coming in, one of them gnawing the strap of the cart, the other looking around with an expression level, appraising, unhurried, that she knew from a kitchen island. They were not his sons the way a scandal is somebody's fault. They were just boys in a grocery store, being 1 year old. Averil stood holding a bag of oranges she had no memory of picking up, and understood she was about to cry in the produce section of the Tom Thumb on Inwood, and that no force on earth was going to prevent it. So she set the oranges down gently in her cart, and left the cart where it stood, full, in the middle of the aisle, and walked out through the automatic doors into the cold, and sat in her car and let it come. It was the last time, she told herself, knowing it wasn't. Some accounts stay open. In January, Othel put her on the Delso Foods engagement. It was routine work, the kind firm staffed with contractors every winter, a vendor compliance audit for a regional food distributor down in the design district, 3 weeks of matching purchase orders to invoices to payments, confirming that money went where paper said it went. Averil took it gladly. Vendor files were knitting for her, rhythmic and orderly, and Delso's records were decent. And for 8 days it was exactly the anesthetic she'd hired herself out to find. On the 9th day, in a subfolder of freight and logistics vendors, she found a company called Trammell Holdings, LLC. She noticed it the way you notice your own name across a crowded room, a cold prickle before conscious thought. She sat still for a moment, telling herself it was a common enough name. There were Trammells all over Texas. There was a whole park downtown named Trammell. Then she opened the file. Trammell Holdings, LLC provided, according to its invoices, consulting and vendor liaison services at $8,500 a month, invoiced quarterly, paid promptly, going back 6 years. The invoices were the kind that made her old antennae hum, single line, round-numbered, no detail, no deliverables, the paper equivalent of a smile with nothing behind it. And the service address, printed small in the footer, was a building she had seen once already this autumn, on a screen at her kitchen table, a downtown address that was nothing but a wall of brass mailboxes, the same registered agent address as WC Residential 2, LLC, the company that owned her sister's house. Avril sat in Delso's borrowed conference room with her heart going slow and hard, and made herself proceed like a professional, which is to say slowly, which is to say she pulled the vendor master record, and there it was, one more field, the one that ended any argument about common names. Contact name for Trammell Holdings, LLC H. Trammell, and an email address at a domain she recognized because Miss Dot had sent her engagement letter from it, back in August, with a smiley face. Her divorce lawyer ran a consulting company. Her divorce lawyer's consulting company had been drawing $102,000 a year for 6 years from a food distributor. And Delso Foods, she confirmed with 3 keystrokes, though she already knew, had one primary customer relationship that dwarfed all its others, page 1 of its own engagement summary, the anchor account its whole business leaned on. Crane Provision Company. She did nothing dramatic. This was the part she would replay later, wondering if it had been wisdom or the mistake that lit the fuse. She did not copy the file. She did not photograph the screen. She closed the folder, finished her day's queue, and at 4 o'clock, in the ordinary course, in the flattest voice she owned, she asked Delso's controller a single routine question, the same question she had asked about 9 other vendors that week. Trammell Holdings, the consulting vendor. I'm not finding statements of work in the file. Do those live somewhere else? The controller, a harmless man named Gustafson, who had been friendly all engagement, said he'd check, and something went across his face while he said it, a half-second of window shade, and Avril smiled and thanked him, and moved on to freight reconciliations, and drove home, and did not sleep. 48 hours later, Othel called her into his office in Las Colinas and shut the door, and he was not laughing at her this time. Delso called it off. He said it, staring at his desk blotter. The whole engagement? Effective Friday? Compliance audits don't get called off in week 2. This one did. He looked up at her, and Othel Berryhill was a kind man, but he was not a stupid one, and she watched him decide how much to say. Their controller called procurement. Procurement called our managing partner, and the word that came down was that they're taking the work to a firm with, and I'm quoting the email, less potential for conflicts. He turned his monitor half toward her, then thought better of it and turned it back. Avril, their CFO named you, not the firm, you, by your married name. The office was very quiet. Outside the glass, the junior staff went on living in the ordinary world, carrying coffee, laughing at something. I asked one question about one vendor, Avril said, in writing through channels about missing statements of work. I believe you. That's $100,000 a year vendor with no deliverables, Othel. In your client's file, you should want that question asked. I do want it asked. He rubbed his eyes. And I have partners and a lease, and the answer that came back down the hill was, pull her off, lose the client quietly, and don't make it a thing. So, it's not going to be a thing. He said it with a shame that she found, obscurely, touching. You'll stay on with us full slate, that's not in question. You're the best hands I've got. But Delso's gone, and I'm asked to tell you to let it stay gone. She let it stay gone for exactly the length of the drive home. Because here was what Othel could not know, and what somebody at Crane Provision, somebody who had made a phone call within one business day of a routine written question, clearly did know. You can pull an engagement. You can name a contractor. You can make a file disappear back behind a client's walls, but you cannot unteach an auditor what a flinch means. For 5 months, Avril had been telling herself a story in which she was the debris of other people's plans, swept up, paid off, managed, grieving in produce aisles, learning to live small. They had just told her a different story. They were still watching her. Which meant, she thought, pulling into her own driveway, in the house they had given her to keep her quiet, there was still something she could see. Chapter 8. The announcement. The news found her on a Tuesday morning in March, in the break room at Berry Hill and Sasser, on a muted television she wasn't watching. She was rinsing her 1 cup at the sink when the ticker crawled past on the business channel, and her own last name went by at the bottom of the screen, like a stranger in a crowd wearing her coat. She stood very still with the water running. The story cycled back around in 4 minutes, and this time there was a photograph, the smoked glass building of Stemmons, and an anchor mouthing words she didn't need audio to understand, and a graphic that would be quoted to her, at her, around her, for weeks. Chicago-based Halverson Capital to acquire Dallas's Crane Provision Company, deal valued at $340 million. Avril turned off the water. Somewhere behind her, a junior accountant said, "Hey, isn't that—" and somebody else hushed him, and the break room performed the small, merciful theater of pretending to be very interested in the refrigerator. She read the coverage that night, the way she read everything now at the kitchen island, with a legal pad. The Dallas Morning News had the fullest piece. Founder and CEO Whitfield Crane, 44, would stay on through a transition. The company's growth was called disciplined. There was a photograph of Whit on the warehouse floor in a hard hat he had never worn in his life, and a quote about family values and Texas grit that she recognized as the work of a publicist earning every dollar. And there, in the 11th paragraph, sitting in plain type like a coin dropped in the street, was the sentence she had spent 5 months waiting for without knowing its shape. The parties signed a letter of intent last August, according to a person familiar with the transaction, with definitive agreements concluded this week after months of due diligence. Last August, Avril put the pad down and sat still while the dates did what dates do, assembled themselves into a wall. The letter of intent, August. Her petition, filed August. The sworn inventory with its 1.5-page valuation letter, its warehouses and truck leases, its word conservative used 3 times, September. The mediation, October. Her signature, October the 14th, on a settlement that characterized a company as modest, private and separate, 60-some days after her husband had agreed in writing to sell it for $250 million. 400,000. She did the arithmetic she had been raised on and could not stop. Her settlement was 0.1% of the announced price. Confetti. She had signed for confetti from a table she had helped build with her own hands in the years when the office was a trailer and she did payroll at that same kitchen island, and Whit called her, in front of the first 6 employees, the real CFO. The family took the news the way she knew they would, which did not make it survivable. Tamsin posted champagne. Not words, just a photograph. 2 flutes on a marble counter that Avril now knew was on Winslow Court. A diamond tennis bracelet catching the light on the wrist that held 1 glass, and a caption of nothing but sparkle emojis, and 400 likes by morning. Loistine went further, because Loistine always went further. Pernella reported it, half apologetically, over the phone. At Wednesday Bible study in front of 30 women, Averil's mother had stood up during praise reports and thanked God for his favor on this family, for lifting the Stokes name. And Mother Hazeltine had led the room in a hallelujah, and not one woman present had asked which daughter the favor had visited, because everyone knew, and the knowing was the point. The society column landed on Sunday, a soft focus profile of Dallas's newest 9-figure founder, and Avril made herself read all of it, standing up, the way you'd take medicine. Most of it was nothing. One paragraph was not nothing. Crane, recently divorced, is famously private about his personal life, though those close to him note he has quietly established trusts for his twin sons, born last year. "Wit thinks in generations," said a long-time associate. "Everything he's built, he built to hand down." She stood in her kitchen and understood that she was reading her own marriage's obituary, written in the language of estate planning. Born last year, twin sons, thinks in generations, 11 years, and she had been a bridge between two pieces of paperwork. And the paperwork had now been filed, and the whole city was applauding the filing. She did not scream, and she did not call Charlene, and she did not drive to Oak Cliff, though she sat in the garage with the engine on for a long minute, wanting to. Instead, she went upstairs to the closet she still thought of as the guest closet, and took down the small grey box she'd been carrying from shelf to shelf for 5 months, unable to keep it and unable to deal with it. The brooch. Eugenia Crane had given it to her the morning of the wedding, in the bride's room of the church on Marsalis Avenue, with 2 sentences and no smile. It was old gold, a spray of leaves with a seed pearl at the stem, and Eugenia had pinned it to the inside of Avril's dress herself, where no one would see it, and said, "This was given to me the morning I married into this family. Now it's yours," and something about the flatness of her voice had made it feel, even then, less like a gift than like a summons being served. Avril had worn it inside her dress all day and kept it 11 years and understood it not at all. She was not keeping anything of theirs. That was the whole of her plan that Tuesday, and she would swear to that later, to Charlene, to Ramona, to herself. The settlement was signed, the house was hers by paper, the money was hers by paper, but the brooch was theirs by blood, and returning it was the last piece of housekeeping between her and a life with no Cranes in it. She told herself it was dignity. Some part of her knew it was also the only door left in the wall, and she was knocking on it. Preston Hollow in March was all bare crepe myrtles and lawn crews. Eugenia's house sat back from the street behind live oaks, the house Wit had grown up in, and Avril had been inside it perhaps a dozen times in 11 years, always at the polite end of the table. A housekeeper answered, and then Eugenia herself appeared in the hall, 71, straight-backed, pearls at 10 in the morning, and her face when she saw her former daughter-in-law did something complicated and quickly mastered. "Avril, I won't stay. I'm sorry to come unannounced." She held out the grey box. "This belongs to your family. I should have sent it months ago." Eugenia looked at the box without taking it. Then she took it and opened it there in the hall and looked at the brooch for a long moment, the seed pearl, the worn leaves, and when she looked up, something had shifted behind the pearls, some door standing ajar that Avril had never once seen open. "You drove across town," Eugenia said slowly, "to return a brooch. It didn't feel right to keep it. After everything they took from you, you came to give something back." The old woman's voice was strange, searching, as if she were translating from another language. "Sit down, please. 5 minutes. Mrs. Crane, I really only came to—" "The settlement." Eugenia was not listening anymore. She was studying Avril's face the way you study a document you suspect has a page missing. When you settled with my son, in October, what they gave you, you were content with it. I signed it, Avril said carefully. It's done. That is not what I asked. A thin, ringed hand closed on Avril's wrist, cool and unexpectedly strong. Child, answer me exactly. When you sat down at that table, what did you understand you were owed? What did your mother tell you was owed? My mother? The hallway seemed to tilt 1 degree. My mother wasn't part of my settlement. My mother hasn't told me anything except to sign and be grateful. Eugenia Crane went pale. It was not a figure of speech. Avril watched it happen. Watched the color leave the older woman's face in real time, from the cheeks first, the way it leaves the dying, and the hand on her wrist tightened, and the grey box trembled slightly in the other, and Eugenia looked at her, through her, with an expression Avril had seen only once before in her life, on her own face, in a rearview mirror, on the drive home from a first birthday party, the face of someone recounting 11 years in a single second and finding a different total. Sign and be grateful, Eugenia repeated barely aloud. She stood in her yard and told you to sign and be grateful. Mrs. Crane, she didn't tell you. The pearls rose and fell. My God, she never told you. Told me what? Eugenia closed her eyes for one long breath, and when she opened them, the shock in them had hardened into something older and colder, something that had been waiting 47 years for a use, and she stepped back from the doorway and held it wide. Come inside, Avril, she said, and sit down, because you signed away the smallest thing they took. Chapter 9. What her mother never told. Her Eugenia's sitting room smelled of lemon oil and old paper, and she did not offer tea. She sat Avril in a wing chair by the cold fireplace, sat herself across from her, set the grey box on the table between them like an exhibit, and began without preamble, the way a woman begins when she has rehearsed something in her head for longer than she can admit. In 1979, I was 24 years old and married to a man named Delbert Ash, not a Crane. That name came later. Her hands folded in her lap still. Delbert kept a woman in Fort Worth for 3 years before I found out, and when I found out, his mother sat me down in a room very like this one and explained kindly, patiently, that a scene would ruin everyone, that I would be taken care of if I signed what they put in front of me and said nothing, ever, to anyone. She looked at Avril. I signed. I was frightened, and I believed, God forgive me, that quiet was a kind of dignity. I did not know then it was simply the cheapest price they could get away with paying. I don't understand what this has to do with, let an old woman get there her own way. Eugenia's mouth tightened. I married Foster Crane 4 years later, Whit's father, a decent man, and I built a second life inside a family that never knew about the first one. I raised my son to believe discretion was a virtue, because discretion had become my entire personality, out of necessity. He learned the lesson too well. He learned it as strategy instead of survival. Do you understand the difference? No. I learned to be quiet because I was afraid. My son learned that other people's quiet could be purchased on schedule, like inventory. She drew a breath. When Whit told me months ago, complaining that you'd refused to sign a confidentiality clause his lawyers called a formality, something in me that had slept since 1979 opened one eye. A woman who would not sign her own silence. I thought of myself at 24 in a room like this one, and thought, good. Good for her. I have been waiting since that dinner for a reason to tell you what I know. Today you returned a brooch instead of asking for anything, and I understood the reason had arrived. Told me what? Avril said again, and her voice had gone thin. That the twins were never an accident of the heart, Eugenia said, and neither was your divorce. Both were a plan, built 2 years ago, and your mother built half of it. The fireplace held its cold ash. Somewhere in the house a clock ticked, unhurried, indifferent. 2 years ago, Eugenia went on, Witt came to me and said he wanted an heir who was unquestionably his, born before any transaction closed, because Halverson, the Chicago people, though he didn't call them that yet, value continuity, family succession, a name to carry the business forward. He said it exactly that plainly to his own mother over dinner, as though he were describing a hiring plan. He also said you had made it clear, more than once, that you were finished having children. He did not intend to divorce a wife who could give him nothing further to sell. Averill sat very still. She remembered those conversations. She remembered them as private griefs, her body, her decision, made at 36 after 2 losses she had never told anyone outside that marriage about. She had not known she was being audited for continued usefulness. So he went looking inside the family, where it could be controlled, where no stranger could resurface later with claims of her own. And your mother. The old woman's voice did not rise, but something in it went very hard. Your mother came to see me, alone, in this room, 18 months ago. I did not seek her out. She came to me. No. She said her younger daughter had always struggled, always been the one nobody built anything around, and that her arrangement could change the whole shape of that girl's life, and by extension her own. She used the word arrangement, not affair. Arrangement, as though we were discussing a marriage between estates in some other century. Eugenia's hand found the arm of her chair and gripped it. I want you to understand, I did not orchestrate this. I sat in this room and listened to your mother and my son build a transaction between 2 of my own grandsons' futures, and I said nothing because by then silence was the only language I had ever been fluent in. That is my failure, and I will carry it, but I will not carry it in secret one more day. Say the terms, Averill said. Her CPA voice, flat, final, the only voice left to her. Whatever you know, all of it, Eugenia told her. The mortgage on the Oak Cliff house, Lowenstein's own home, 30 years unpaid, refinanced twice, had been quietly satisfied in full 14 months ago, wired from an account bearing initials Averill now recognized without needing to be told. The house on Winslow Court, bought in cash by an entity Averill had already traced to a brass mailbox downtown. The same address, the same architecture of shells, was Tamsin's compensation, current and ongoing. And there was a third piece, the one Eugenia delivered last, the one that made Averill understand for the first time the full arithmetic of what had been done to her. A promissory note. $4 million, payable to Lowenstein Renee Stokes, executed by an entity controlled by Whitfield Crane, contingent, Eugenia was precise about the word, contingent, on 2 conditions. The acquisition of Crane Provision Company, closing without incident, and Averill's divorce settled, silent and final before that closing occurred. Your mother was not paid to lose a daughter, Eugenia said quietly. She was paid to manage one, to keep you moving toward the signature, the casseroles, the church. Mr. Trammell, who has drawn a retainer from my son's company for 6 years. Averill, you should know that plainly. I have seen the disbursement. Every hand that pushed you gently toward that table in October was in some fashion paid to push. Averill did not cry. She had cried in a grocery store parking lot and in her own shower and once, absurdly, over a pound cake. And she found sitting in this cold room with the whole architecture of her betrayal finally laid bare in front of her, that she had run out of that particular currency. What rose in her instead was colder and far more useful. The note, she said, contingent on the acquisition closing. It hasn't closed yet. It closed this week. The announcement, announced, Averill said, not closed, not in the legal sense. A $340 million transaction with a Chicago private equity buyer does not finish closing the same week it's announced, Mrs. Crane. There are still weeks of final conditions, regulatory sign-off, title work, representations and warranties that have to survive scrutiny all the way to the wire. She was standing now, though she didn't remember rising. And representations and warranties on a company sale always include one particular promise made by the seller in writing to the buyer's lawyers: that there is no undisclosed claim against the shares being sold, no fraud, no concealed community property interest belonging to a spouse whose signature was procured by a fraudulent valuation. Eugenia watched her with something that was not quite hope and not quite fear. "You said his shares were separate property," Avril said, half to herself now, pacing the small cold room, the accountant surfacing whole and entire after 5 months underground. "They characterized it that way in my inventory, but the company was incorporated in 2016, a year into our marriage, funded initially with capital we both know came out of accounts I managed myself. That characterization was false the day it was signed, and a settlement procured by a false financial disclosure isn't just unfair under Texas law, Mrs. Crane. It's void. It was never a valid settlement to begin with. It only ever looked like one." She stopped at the cold fireplace and looked down at the ash, and for the first time all year, something in her chest that had been clenched since a kitchen drawer in Oak Cliff eased 1 degree, not into peace, but into purpose. 18 days, she said. The paper said definitive agreements this week. Final closing typically runs a matter of weeks on a deal this size. I know the language. I used to write it. She turned to Eugenia. "I need everything you just told me in writing, if you're willing. And I need the name of a lawyer who has never once taken $1 from Crane Provision Company or from Hollis Trammell, and who will move faster than either of them expects a grieving woman to move." Eugenia rose from her chair, slowly, the straightness returning to her spine as though the confession itself had been a weight she'd carried folded. And for the first time since Avril had known her, something that was almost a smile crossed the old woman's face, thin and fierce. "There is a woman named Ramona Vicks," she said, "downtown. She represented my sister in a matter years ago, and Hollis Trammell has hated her ever since, which I have always considered the finest character reference a lawyer can have." She walked to a writing desk in the corner, drew out cream paper, and began, without being asked twice, to write. "I will give you everything I know, Avril, in my own hand, and I will sign it. I owed a debt in 1979 that I let compound for 47 years. Let it come due today." Outside, the March light was going long and gold across the lawn, and somewhere across the city, her phone, left behind in her car, was beginning to fill with a name she was not yet ready to answer. Chapter 10. What was always hers. Ramona Vicks kept an office on Elm Street with no view and no waiting room music, and she read Eugenia's handwritten statement twice, and the forensic file Avril built in 4 sleepless nights, once, slowly, all the way through, before she said a word. "You built this yourself?" "I used to do this for a living." "You still do?" Ramona set the file down and looked at her for a moment, the way one professional sizes up another across a table for the first time. "Most clients bring me a feeling and ask me to find the facts that support it. You brought me the facts already assembled, dated, sourced, and cross-referenced. I could file this by Friday if I wanted to be reckless about it. I don't intend to be reckless." 18 days, Avril said. "That's what the paper gave us." 18 days is enough, if we're precise. We won't sue anybody yet. We put the buyer's counsel on written notice quietly, lawyer to lawyer, that there is an undisclosed community property claim against the shares being sold, procured through a fraudulent, separate property characterization at the time of divorce. A deal this size doesn't survive that sentence, sitting unresolved on the closing table. Halverson's lawyers will stop everything to make it go away, and they will make your husband make it go away, because it's his fraud, not theirs. Private equity does not buy lawsuits. They buy certainty. And if he calls me instead of them, then you'll know exactly how frightened he is, Ramona said, by how fast he calls. He called that night. Avril let it ring 4 times, watching his name light the screen in her dark kitchen, and then she answered and said nothing, and let him do what he had never once done in 11 years, which was speak first into a silence he hadn't engineered. We need to talk, not lawyers, us. They met 2 days later in a private room at a hotel off the tollway, neutral ground, no Trammell, no Kessington, at Ramona's insistence and against every instinct Avril had toward avoiding him forever. He looked, for the first time since the kitchen island in September, unrested. The calm had a hairline crack running through it now, visible in the way he kept resetting his cuffs, and she watched him try to talk around the crack the way he'd once talked around every uncomfortable number in his own books, smoothing, reframing, buying time with tone. Whatever's in that file, he said, we can resolve without turning 18 days into a war. I'll make you extraordinarily comfortable. Name it. I already know what it's worth, Avril said. Half the community value of Crane Provision Company as of the date you signed a letter of intent you never disclosed to me. Ramona has the number. It isn't a negotiation, Wit. It's arithmetic. You taught me to trust arithmetic over people. I finally listened. Something moved behind his eyes, some old machinery grinding to find a new angle, and when he spoke again, his voice had lost its boardroom polish entirely, gone plain and almost young, the way a man sounds when the performance finally costs more than it's worth. You know what the worst part is? He almost smiled, and it was terrible to see. The timing wasn't cruelty, it was precision. Heirs delivered before the liquidity event. Wife settled before the letter of intent went public. Every piece landed exactly when it needed to. He said it the way another man might describe a beautifully executed trade, proud even now, even here, of his own machine, unable to help himself, needing her to understand the elegance of it even as it convicted him. I didn't set out to break your heart, Avril. I set out to de-risk a transaction. You were a line item that resolved itself faster than I expected. She had come to this room braced for an apology she didn't want and didn't need. What he gave her instead was worse and, in its way, a mercy. The plain, unashamed shape of what she had actually married, spoken finally in his own words instead of hers. 11 years of wondering what lived underneath the calm, and here it was, laid on a hotel table like a closing statement. Nothing underneath it at all but more calm, engineered all the way down. There's one more condition, she said. No NDA, not on this, not ever. Whatever I choose to say about any of it for the rest of my life is mine to say. That will cost me more than the money. I know, Avril said. That's why I'm asking for it. He signed 9 days later, 4 days before closing, with Halverson's lawyers watching every stroke of the pen like men diffusing something. The restructured settlement voided the October agreement in full and replaced it with a number that made Ramona, reading it over the phone, go quiet in a way Avril had never heard a lawyer go quiet before. Buried in the same restructuring, unglamorous and absolute, was a clause that ended 2 other stories at once. Every prior side agreement connected to the marriage's dissolution, including any contingent notes payable to third parties, was extinguished as part of the fraud settlement. Lowenstein's $4 million died on a page nobody but 3 lawyers ever read. Tamsin's house turned out to be titled, in the end, to a Crane entity that no longer had any reason to keep a tenant it wasn't buying with. Avril heard about the eviction notice, the way she heard most family news now, second-hand from Paleℹ, delivered in the same breathless register that had once carried gossip about Winslow Court's champagne. She felt hearing it, something she hadn't expected. Not triumph, exactly, more like watching weather arrive that she hadn't summoned and couldn't have stopped. Lowenstein came to Bishop Arts on a Thursday in May, to the storefront where Avril Stokes, CPA, had gone up in gold leaf on the glass 2 weeks earlier, and stood in the doorway in her good dress and did not apologize. "Family is family," she said. "Whatever's happened, I'm still your mother, and I raised you, and there's such a thing as owing somebody for that." Avril looked at her for a long moment, at the woman who had folded towels in a backyard and called a stolen ring an opportunity, and found, at the bottom of everything, that the anger had finally burned down to something plain and load-bearing. "You were paid already," she said. Lowenstein's face did the thing it had never once done at that cake table. It moved, cracked, showed her something real, and then she turned and walked back out into the May heat, and Avril did not watch her go all the way down the block. She had a client meeting at 2, the twins she could not fix, and did not try to. She set aside from her own settlement protected trusts in both boys' names, structured with Ramona's care so that neither their mother nor their grandmother could ever reach $1 of it, releasing only for school, only for need, administered by a bank that had never heard of any Stokes or any Crane. Mercy, she told Charlene, aimed only at the people who'd never chosen anything. Charlene, hearing the terms over wine on the same patio where she'd first asked her question, was quiet a long moment and then said only, "That's the coldest kind thing I ever heard a person do," and Avril thought that was probably the truest review the whole year would earn her. She rented the storefront on North Bishop Avenue in June, small, brick, a block from the coffee shop where she used to sit alone on Saturdays, pretending not to be waiting for her old life to call. The gold leaf on the glass took a sign painter 2 afternoons. Avril Stokes, CPA, nothing else, no married name to explain, no partner's name to share the credit with. Her first 3 clients were referrals from Othel, who cried a little on the phone when she gave notice, and told her if the practice ever needed overflow help, Berryhill and Sasser would be honored to be the smaller firm for once. On a Saturday at the end of that summer, Avril unlocked her own office before the staff arrived, made 1 cup of coffee in 1 cup, and sat down at a desk with her name on the glass behind her, backward from where she sat, the way it would read to the whole street outside. Her phone buzzed once, her mother's number, and she looked at it a moment, the way you look at weather from a safe window, and set it face down on the desk and let it ring itself out. Then she opened the first file of the day and got to work, and did not once, in all the files that followed, keep anything hidden in a drawer.